Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Johnny Law and Courtney Staples. On today's episode, longtime patron Diplo Raptor has one of their patented prompts for us. But before we get into that, we always want to remind our listeners that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, where you can click the link, follow some instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. On to today's prompt, coming once again from one Mr. Diplomacy Raptor. The prompt is: the sky giant has fallen, and with his death, a new land to colonize. The new land is the sky giant's corpse, of course, and it has fallen off of the coast of a fantasy nation in the Age of Sail, and it's ready to be conquered and colonized. The fantasy nations of this world are excited as every body part of the giant is worth its weight in gold. It is massive, roughly 50 to 60 miles tall, and sky giants do not rot. A bunch of tenets before the tenet, but the tenet number one is: this is the last sky giant there will ever be, and that does not mean that others did not come before it. Number two, the nation is establishing a collection of new duchies for this massive new addition to the empire, a soon to be rich territory if you can handle all that comes with it. And number three, one of the new staple crops is harvesting sky giant wheat, which is basically just hair that continues to grow even after death, which the tree-sized strands are harvested and ground into a powder which can be made into cubes, which provide all the nutrients a person needs for the day. So we've got an infinite food glitch. Now, let's dive right into it. John, what have you got for us today? What is your first tenet? What are we introducing to this world of giant corpses?
Well, I got one complicated tenet and one simple tenet. So, in honor of Diplo Raptor's prompt, I will do the complicated tenet to start with, and that is that although there are other giants that have died in the past, and this has been populated by the burgeoning civilizations, this is the first time in history where competing factions have been able to plan for such a land grab. And because of this, most you would assume would vie for the head because it's got the hair and all that. But one particular clever faction, who's going to be our bad guys, I think. So I'm already jumping the factions, get ahead of the game. But they're determined to focus all their military power to take and hold the dong as the ultimate tactic.
God.
How did I know you were going there?
Of course.
How did I know?
I've done the math, right? So from a military standpoint, their urethra would be a fantastic place to hold because you could basically fit a full legion in it. So saying it's 55 miles tall, we'll take the average giant height between the 50-60 miles, and say the average human is 5'9", and the average flaccid penis is 3.61 inches, I think. So that means that the giant's member in length would be, hold on, where's my math sheet here? Oh, there it is. Okay.
You got like spreadsheets dedicated to this.
So we're looking at the giant Johnson length is 2.61 miles, with the urethral opening being 1,010 feet. So that's like enough to fit almost 9 parts of a Roman legion. Which we call it the
John, I just realized that you have
maniples
for spread cheeks over here.
Spread cheeks. Well, wow. When you talk about the Battle of the Bulge, you got to be prepared on how you're going to set up your fortifications. But the whole point of this is this will be a way to get inside the body, which is they basically can set up their mining operations to start harvesting the different parts. So, a quick shot up the urethra to the prostate, which would be about like a 6.5 mile journey, I think. And then just some burrowing into the rectal cavity. And then right there, you like open up the whole body. So while everyone's fighting over the head and like these noses that are going to be hard to, there's not very defensible, this one faction would be able to focus on, the schlong and just cover their bases there. Let alone if they start doing underwater operations, go right through the rectum.
So I'm imagining this giant's member as like a wizard's tower, or like the perfect citadel, so to speak.
Well, I was assuming it was flaccid when it died, though.
Okay, we're gonna have to get into that because I've got some words to say about how this giant died.
Okay.
Got some autoerotic asphyxiation going on with this giant.
Well, in that case, we would have to do a perennial breach. If and to get to the that'd be they'd change their things. But I'm sure you could see that from a long distance as they're sailing up.
I feel like this gives new word or new meaning to the words tainted lands.
There we go.
Like, that's another one that I've got just loaded up. By the way, I was not expecting us to go immediately into genitalia, but I'm glad that
we met.
No, I mean, like, I knew that it was going to come up. I just didn't know that we're going face first into it.
Yeah.
I thought that we're going to, like loosen ourselves up and then like ease ourselves into this giant member. But apparently we're just going in raw, which is fine.
Watch out for that lockjaw.
Yeah, right. So, okay.
I just didn't want one of you to beat me to the punch. That was the main thing.
I do have to say, typical male over here, assuming that this giant has a dick, is a man.
Oh.
Wow.
Well, that wasn't one of my tenets. I did not give this giant a vagina. Don't worry.
I just have to change my tactics a little bit. We're gonna. It's not impossible though. It's still.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you my tenet before I lose it. So very simply, I'm going to veer us away a little bit here, but I think that it is suggestive to a certain extent. My first tenet is the giant died saving the world from a cataclysmic kaiju. Think like a titanic battle. And when you go into battle, sometimes you get excited. It happens, right? That's been known to happen. But anyway, the kaiju itself died fighting the giant as well. And so the corpse of this kaiju is actually intermingled with the landscape of the giant. And unlike the giant, it is starting to rot.
Gross.
Yes. Now I know that we did something like fairly similar with a giant tree recently, and like Yggdrasil and the world serpent. So I'm going to advise that it's not some kind of reptilian or scaly thing. I'm hoping for like a Fenrir situation, perhaps, or if we want to come up with some other different kind of world-ending animal, I'm cool with that too. If you want it to be some kind of I don't know, giant Satan demon, that's fine as well. All I care about is that this corpse is draped in, around, and on the corpse of the sky giant as well.
Was it fucking the kaiju?
They're locked in combat, Courtney. Get your head out of the gutter. Jesus.
That's what I just said. Yeah, God damn it, Courtney. How dare you disrespect the legacy of this giant who just so happened to be excited while being in combat. That happens to a lot of men. I hear from veterans, but that's just what I
actually think it does. I think your blood is more useful in other places.
No, it's a thing. It's definitely a thing.
If you squeeze your thighs, you can get rid of a boner really fast. That's just how anatomy works.
John, I've never wanted to get rid of a boner very fast in a way that
I used to do a lot of public speaking as a teenager, so yeah, that was a lesson quickly learned.
Was that your kink? Was like public speaking?
No, when you're a teenager, you can't help it.
Yeah, that's why you just tuck it into your belt, John. Jesus Christ.
So anyway, my first tenet. Moving on. My first tenet is that much like humans have fungi and microbes and tiny mites on our skin, the sky giant has pretty much an ecosystem of creatures on its body. But given how huge the sky giant is, those things that were microscopic to it are considerably bigger compared to humans.
Right, we've got a Cloverfield situation where the little scabies and like the little parasites that live on its body are actually like human size or bigger and horrifying and threatening, stuff like that.
Never actually seen Cloverfield.
I feel like you'd like it, actually.
Oh,
yeah. I feel like it's got a good sense of body horror to it that I think you'd appreciate.
Oh, nice. But yeah, that's the vibe that I'm going for, where like you show up on this thing, and I'm sure especially as you get into particularly hairy regions, there are a lot of things, maybe some crabs. I don't know what this giant has been up to, but yes, there are creatures that we would have to either defeat or tame or what have you.
I can vibe with that for sure. It adds a sense of danger to the landscape, which I think is pretty interesting and fun. My follow-up question is, are any of these things sentient, or are these like fairly mindless beasts that we're looking at?
I had pictured them as mindless, but I could see it going either way. Did you have something in mind?
Oh no, I just want to avoid like colonizing in the literal sense. Just
Oh,
because I feel like that would be troublesome to bring something like that up. But yeah.
I like them as like wild fauna, whatnot.
yeah. Okay.
I will say though, to my calculations, they'd probably be about 55 feet long.
Oh, like the microbe.
Yeah, if we're going off of
yeah.
the size of a normal mite on a human, and then off of my ratio of my human to giant ratio.
I'm glad you have that spreadsheet all set up already.
You know, it's just important. You want to world build, you know, you can't just willy-nilly be throwing out numbers. You gotta.
I mean, you kind of can, John. That's part of the beauty of it, you know?
Listen, Daniel's not here, so someone's got to fucking bring some, credibility to this shit. And I'm the man to do that, as I've proven in the past.
Yeah, to be fair, if Daniel were on this episode, he would nope out immediately at the sign of like giant cock. He's like, nah, I'm good. I'm out of here.
Well, that's also why I did it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Now, together is where we have free reign to be as gross as we want to be.
While Courtney just shakes her head.
Yep.
No, you mean Courtney nods her head approvingly. Like, that's what you mean, John. Well, anyway, you said you had a simple tenet, right, John? What was your second simpler tenet?
The remaining blood in the giant's body is caustic.
Sure. Simple, straightforward. Yep. Are we thinking like alien level of caustic where it's like truly just dissolves everything, or is it something else?
No, I don't think alien. I think like it's definitely harmful to the skin. It might even like emit noxious fumes or some sort. Like, but it's a danger. It's a hazard. So that means as you're mining in the body, you have to be very careful of which directions you go through.
I funnily enough had basically the same tenet for my second one, so I'm just going to jump in here. That mine was that the giant's blood, unlike its hair, doesn't regenerate, but it's a highly valued resource and it's pretty much radioactive.
Okay. I can come up with another tenet.
Oh no, I mean I think it's fine if we have.
Don't you dare come up with another tenet. No, like finding the stuff that glue like gels well or like overlaps. That's part of the fun of building this together, right? Like, we don't know what we're bringing into the table before we get here. Like, I didn't know that you were starting stiff and going from there, but like,
I said it was flaccid, not stiff.
Okay, but rigor mortis has settled in, John. What do you got to say about that? He's already stiff. Anyway. What's also interesting about this?
Death.
Okay, so no lie, this came up recently where there was a story in the news where a priest said that Jesus was hard on the crucifix and died that way, and that is a real thing. That's like, trust me, I know what it's like when like this happens. Like men die and they get hard and then they shit themselves. This was a priest who was saying this. He like doubled down on it and everything.
What was his like point to like what was he trying to
I don't know. I think he was just like, it's okay to get a boner because Christ died and had one when he I don't know, man. I'm not in charge of that shit. I just saw that and I'm like, that is a wild headline and that is a wild story. Yeah.
Christ died for our thoughts. So yeah, the death erection, angel lust, rigor erectus, or terminal erection is a post-mortem erection, technically a priapism observed in the corpses of men who have been executed partially by hanging. So that's a hanging thing, which I don't know, maybe there's some kind of autoerotic asphyxiation by this kaiju.
I mean,
that's what
we
I was
haven't
saying
figured
before.
out what it is.
Yeah. I mean,
okay. To steer us back on track just a little bit here, right? So what I think is interesting about both of your prompts together with my first prompt or my first tenet is this idea that it died fighting. So it's probably going to have open wounds, which means that it's going to be like mildly radioactive as you tend to like explore these lands, which I think is kind of interesting.
Mhm. And if there's like a lot of blood stored in its erect penis, then I guess where they're entering into to start from is pretty radioactive itself.
Well, the blood doesn't actually get into the urethra unless there's some other underlying problems.
Unless he was fucking this kaiju and it.
I don't think they were.
Listen, I said Mortal Kombat, not fucking. This was not Bugs Bunny in a wig, and then it got the Sky Giant. That's not my tenet. And honestly, if you wanted to use your tenet to do that, you lost your opportunity, Courtney.
Yeah,
I don't know what to tell you.
I'll stick with the radioactive blood.
So, I mean, Jesus Christ, yeah. My second tenet, which is not blood related, actually, it's also got to do with the positioning of the giant to a certain extent. I was actually interested in like figuring out the origins of this thing, right? Like I've got like how it died, which I was kind of interested in, but I was also interested in this idea of, okay, it's a sky giant, but it's the last one. And I wanted to have it so it's like, when it died, so did magic. So currently, right, again, bringing in themes of like rot and decay, the world still has all of its magic, but eventually it will start to fade and it will become weaker and weaker until you require parts of the giant for like spell components, basically. So harvesting this thing is going to be even more important than people currently realize.
Interesting. That makes me wonder then if the blood is like a major source of magic, if that's why it's highly valued, but also very dangerous to handle.
It's like effectively pure magic in that way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That or like maybe the giant like exhaling its version of CO2 is magic. Or I was going to take it to a fart joke, but I'll stick to the dick jokes for now.
Honestly, John, I think considering our current other co-host, I feel like the CO2 is a little bit more interesting to me. Like we've done blood magic so much, and I love the idea of it breathing magic into the world. Like that's really fucking cool to me.
But on top of that, though, we can also work it into the blood thing because as it's breathing in whatever their atmosphere is, it's converting part of that into its blood, right? So like that's the blood still contains whatever the oxygen equivalent is, and then it's whatever it's exhaling is tainted with the magic.
Does that then mean like the lungs themselves would be a major source of magic if that's what is the source ultimately?
I think that makes sense to me. I mean, well, again, from the prompt, right? Like when this giant rots, it's not actually going to rot, it's going to turn into a natural landscape.
Right.
And so what are those lungs going to turn into? Are they going to be like giant caves that have like incredibly valuable, like do the membranes turn into something that is able to filter or create magic in some way?
Yeah, I'm picturing like tree roots, like the really thick kind that intertwine and almost turn into like a webbing as they thin out. Like I could see that in there.
And brought back the kaiju cataclysm episode we did a couple weeks back, where I think they like kept the dragon's heart. Remember that? Where they kept the scientists kept the dragon's heart. Like I'm kind of picturing something like that. Like the idea is if you could try to get the lungs out as a whole piece, and but it's gonna be this giant several mile thing long. Give me a second. I'll tell you exactly how long. But I think like that'd be once you've claimed, secured the land. I think that would be like the major project that they would try to do. And the other thing is like, do they realize that the magic's running out? Like, were they able to predict this? Because this is the first time
that's true.
Like the last giant. This is a world changing event.
That's true. Maybe they don't have any idea that like that's the real source of magic in the world.
Yeah, I was operating under the impression that this thing will come to pass, but they don't know it yet.
Okay.
So I think that it's kind of like in Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire, where when dragons die, so magic dims really hard, right? And then once dragons return, oh, my resurrection magic actually starts working again, stuff like that. And I think it's going to be like a Fallout type of thing where magic decays like and becomes less and less potent over time. Unless you were either using giant element or like giant components. I think that is ultimately what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So the lungs would be just over 17 miles long and would weigh 111,108 pounds. That's one lung.
Wow.
Damn. That's crazy.
So that's like over 55 tons.
Jesus.
Wait. How much blood would this giant have then, John? Let's do the math. What do you got for us?
Volume. All right.
Listen, you're setting the bar. Well, I'm going to ask you as much as possible. Okay?
And this is just going off my ratio, so I don't know. So Dole has 1.5 gallons, up to 1.5 gallons in his eye. So he was probably pumping pretty hard. So it's 75,756 gallons of blood.
How much is that in hogsheads?
What's a hogshead? Is that a quaff?
All right. Enough tormenting John with math. Let's go ahead. So we've done both of the tenets already? Is that right?
Yeah, they're all out there.
All right. Why don't we go ahead and do our quick little recap then? Or do we have questions that we need to answer before we get into the recap?
Well, just another thought about the blood, because obviously always thinking about blood is like maybe it's more of like an oil type resource or something like that, where like the prompt says that they're in the age of sail. So maybe this is potentially a way for them to like push into the next level of tech.
Kind of like whale oil, or it's like,
yeah.
Have you ever played Dishonored?
Briefly.
Yes. Okay. The lore for that is pretty interesting because whale oil eventually becomes like this magical thing, right? Where their entire like world runs on whale oil, and it's far more potent and magical than, like gasoline or fossil fuels effectively, right? So we could have it be something like that where it's just like super enhanced, or I like the idea of it being a combination of oil and radioactive material, by the way.
So is this more like a diesel where you don't need the combustion from pressure, or will there be steam given off at any point with this, or
I'm triggered right now.
Yeah, Courtney, why don't you explain that? Why don't you specifically explain what we're talking about here, Courtney?
I'm good. I'm all set.
Nope.
Okay. Gotcha. So should we move on then? Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, great. So what other questions do we want to answer? Whatever things do we need to discuss about this particular world? What do we need to know? Because I feel like we've got some interesting bits and bobs going on here, but in terms of like overall vibe, I'm not really sure. Like, is this a frontier Wild West type situation? Is this like a hacking into the jungle? Like, is it an Amazon exploration? Like, what are we looking at here? What do you think?
Well, the one thing I gotta wonder is, what was the giants' impression of the civilizations that exist on this land? Because obviously they're smaller than the mites on our body, like the people themselves, but they must have created, sprawling cities and stuff like that. So like, does he just see it, or do they just see it as, or had they seen it? I mean, what's the right grammar here? When they saw it in the past, did they just see it as like almost like you would see a connection of like mushrooms and stuff like that, or like did they know, were they the protector of the world?
Well, my tenet specifically says that it saved the world from a cataclysmic kaiju, but it could just be unrelated. Like I'm picturing that they would treat cities the way that we would treat anthills effectively, right? So it might not even be something that it was aware that it was doing. Or it could be like some kind of great deity that is, like the protector of the realm or something like that. I'm cool with either one, but I'm more interested in like the idea of like, why does this matter? Why does the giant having some kind of relationship with this world matter? And how can we make that how can we pull that out in the setting?
I was also wondering, does this thing, since it's called the sky giant, does it like, is it up in the sky all the time when it's alive and it just fell to the earth, or does it actually walk around and it's called the sky giant because it's so fucking tall? And if so, like if it did have its feet on the ground, like that would have a lot of implications about the world too.
I agree with you completely. I think that it changes quite a bit about the relationship if it's like, whoops, just wiped out a country, my bad. Like, or is it like I think when I hear sky giant, Courtney, I'm kind of with you where I assumed that it was basically living in the clouds in some way. And then
Mhm.
once this kind of cataclysm happened, it was forced to come to Earth, to touch grass, if you will.
Okay, so it's been floating this whole time over. Because
Okay.
standing alone and using our current atmosphere, it would be
I was just looking that up too.
between above the mesosphere and to the thermosphere, beginning of the thermosphere.
Yeah, this is why I'm imagining that like it is like physiologically, right? It doesn't make sense for it to walk because it would
Mhm.
basically destroy the world as it
Yeah.
walks,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, pretty much.
All right, so I like the Rick and Morty episode where they have the big hobo Santa flying over the world. It's like that.
Yeah, actually, but worse, actually. Yeah.
And like when it cries, it's like a tsunami.
You're lucky that all it does is cry.
This is what it sounds like.
When giants cry. Yeah. Okay. So okay, how do we square this though? Because I think that you're right, is that if this thing is like 60 miles tall, 50 or 60 miles tall, that's absurd. How
Yeah.
does it maneuver? Like, is this, I think about this now. We're under the assumption that it's a humanoid, right? We
Mhm.
could
Mhm.
just, like we could just imagine that it is like a stone serpent or something that is not necessarily, humanoid. So it can actually physically move around the world in some way.
I'm gonna have to ask you to pump the brakes there because I spent way too much time converting human anatomy to giant anatomy. So come on, have some respect.
Okay,
What if
but
it's
also,
But magic, it can fly. It's magic.
yeah,
Magic.
what if like in its living form, it it just had a different physiology as far as like what it was made of? I mean, obviously it is turning into stone and stuff when it dies, but like maybe when it's living, it's just made of clouds or like
Oh,
made of who knows, like anything that could float really or
oh,
maneuver
you know,
around.
like
okay,
you know how like blobfish are.
Yeah,
Like
I
when
was
you
thinking
bring them
that
to the
too.
when you bring them to the
Yeah,
surface, they get all and they look
yeah.
like what's his name?
Ted Cruz.
Ted Cruz. There you go. Yeah,
Yes.
they look kind of like Ted Cruz,
Yeah.
but in the water they look very natural because the gravity is different there. So that would make sense in the sky too, because of
Mhm.
the way
okay.
the air
I,
pressure
I I
changes, air
think
thins.
I think that could work. I think that makes a lot more sense. Where in its like natural form, it's more condensed, right? And so when it dies, something happens where it effectively releases a little bit and becomes and expands in its death, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm
Or vice
cool with that.
versa, even that it's more incorporeal in the sky.
Yeah, like it's more of a blobfish in the sky, and then when it dies, it like
Mm.
shows up as
I, I
person-esque.
I definitely like the idea of instead of rotting, that it does actually transform at that point, and that's not its natural state.
Mhm.
Ooh, oh yeah. So like there's this idea that it is inherent like in its living state, it is incorporeal, it is ethereal. And then when it dies, it's like, oh, I'm stuck in the primordial or I'm stuck in the
Yeah,
material plane. Fuck. And then it like starts to solidify.
Yeah.
That is rot to it. That is
yeah.
rigor mortis to it, where it's like, oh, I'm actually material now. That makes sense, I think.
Yeah, which then has implications for like what happened when it fell to the earth. Did it instantly solidify when it died and like crash to the earth as this stone thing, or did it slowly fade into it?
Yeah, it's kind of like what happens if like a cloud falls, like
Mhm.
and it's like whooshes out like um like we've been to Norway together, Courtney. We've seen clouds roll in on the
Mhm.
fjords of Norway. I'm imagining that it's kind of like that, but much faster, where it's like
Mhm.
where you hear a thwump as it lands,
Well,
Yeah.
then we have the problem of the kaiju falling as well, though. So
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
definitely
'Cause
gonna
that
be more of a crash.
yeah.
well,
Mhm.
maybe okay. Hold on, because this I think we can square this. Maybe the sky giant solidified to soften the blow of this kaiju.
Mm,
It's like if I don't become corporeal, if I don't sacrifice myself, this will basically destroy the world, right?
interesting.
So maybe it becoming corporeal is in fact a heroic act in and of itself.
I see. Maybe it could even have been like, yeah, intercepting this thing on the way if it was some kind of like space dragon or something
Mhm.
swooping into the
Sure.
atmosphere.
I'm still picturing it as a crab.
Giant space crab.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wait, no, I'm
Mhm.
down. I like the
Yeah.
idea of a giant like space crab type thing.
Yeah, same.
I'm
Yeah.
making crab motions with my hands right now, if you can hear.
Yeah.
So as the editor of this episode, I can hear, and it's going to annoy the shit out of me as I'm removing it from the editing process.
So you're saying I should continue?
I'll just it's so weird that John's entire audio track just got deleted from
Just
this episode. It's wild.
47 minutes in, just stopped.
Yeah. Yeah. Editor's note: John had to leave and go back to his home planet. So sorry about that, everyone.
Poochie.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And you get exactly 3 frames of animation as you do so. That's it. All right, so okay, giant space crab. Cool with that. I like the idea that it's like I like the idea that it's a crab. And now we've got like a crab that is tangled up
Mhm.
with like a humanoid-ish shape, which I think is kind of horrifying actually when I think
Mhm.
about it. Like but also I'm totally cool with that imagery of like a crab held aloft in the air or rather
Mhm.
by the earth itself, right?
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
pincers pushed in and like the rest of its body kind of like you said, they're locked in combat.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
Mhm.
this crab's gonna rot.
Yeah.
yes, and
That's
that is,
gonna
I think
smell real bad.
yeah, it's gonna be so noxious and horrible. Oh, I love it, yeah.
And the 55-foot long mites are gonna eat it as well.
Mhm.
Oh,
You
man,
know,
there's
Yeah.
going to be so many things that come out of this crab, like, you're going to get scavengers coming like, "Oh, I can just eat off of this giant deity crab forever." So, what's kind of interesting there is that you've got this dichotomy where or like, "Oh, actually, wait, no. It's not a dichotomy because now the Duchies are looking at that crab and be like, what can we harvest from it?
mhm.
Like you're going to get like multiple expeditions where some people are interested in the giant and others are interested in the giant crab, which I think is
Mhm.
again, crab sounds so dumb. I'd rather call it
No.
a charybdis or something like that,
No,
but
it's a
we
crab.
get what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that. And maybe this could be the first time that a crab like this has come to the earth, maybe, or the first time in a very, very long time. So it's like a
Yeah.
much newer thing than the previous sky giants.
And is this thing just a herald for things to come? Like, are we
Mhm.
going to get like meteor crabs, like coming in later?
Mhm.
Like I think that there's some interesting stuff that we can kind of do here.
I'm also wondering what happens with the sea levels with all this happening.
Yeah.
There's a major displacement, right?
Mhm.
Oh, almost certainly, right? Like, I imagine that the the fantasy kingdom that they're talking about in the original prompt, guess what? That didn't used to be coastal, but now it is.
Yeah.
Oh,
You know?
yeah.
Yeah, we used to be a landlocked nation before the giant happened. But also, I suppose that is an interesting question because I would imagine that this event is cataclysmic, right? This thing like
Mhm.
giant falls, waves wipe out a bunch of people. So why is there a scramble for resources when it should be like we need to scramble to, like kind of recover? Or is it a matter of like only the opportunists are coming after this thing?
I mean, given that it is a source of infinite food, like the giant's hair, which is gross, that could be part of it. Like if these countries are dealing with now like mass famine because their croplands got wiped out and are now like bays and stuff, like they're going to need all these sources of food to recover. So that could be related.
You also have to think that they had contingency plans if the giant didn't win. Like, they saw the world was coming to an end to a certain extent with this with Claudette showing up. So like, they didn't know that the giant would win necessarily or sacrifice.
So you're suggesting that these opportunists were like ready to go, like they're like, no matter what happens, we're going to profit off of this.
Or, survive somehow.
Right, survive or like profit or get something out of the deal. So what I'm hearing is that the people who are colonizing this giant land, none of them are good people. That's my kind of takeaway. Is that
how many colonizers are good people in history?
I mean, factually accurate. Yes, you're 100% correct. But like my point is that the people who are like genuinely care about their people and their homeland, they're staying back. They're like, listen, I've got to make sure that people don't kill each other in the streets, that people get fed. Like you can go off and do your adventure thing, but also like I don't see the moral person going off and being an adventurer on the corpse of this giant.
I could see it being like a survival desperation thing for, if a coastal community was wiped out and they're trying to scrounge for resources, it's like, okay, either I could, go back to this other country that was perhaps our enemy, or I could push forward and try to harvest some of this stuff for my own people so that we don't starve to death while all this like colonizing is going on.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That is a lot more interesting to me because now we're turning these colonizers into desperate pilgrims, basically, right? Like where it's like, oh, we have nowhere else to go. Our entire homeland is wiped out. We have to settle this area now.
I think that's the split between the people organizing it and the people actually doing it.
It's like a mix
in history. Yeah.
We're all, I know that we talked about factions already, but I can see those factions forming up immediately, and I think that's really cool.
Well, I do like the idea that we're focusing on the story from one nation's perspective, but with my tenant, I just want to add that there are other nations involved, and they're all going to compete in like bloody wars over this thing.
Yeah, and I'm actually okay with zooming out just a little bit. Like I know that the prompt asked us to do it from the Duchies or perspective, but I find that this is perhaps a little bit more interesting to me.
Yeah, well, fine with whatever.
All right, cool. All right, I feel like we're in a good spot where we can do a recap and go over our tenants to make sure that we need to either buff them up, make sure that they're that everyone's satisfied. So, John, you got us started. Boy, did you get us started. What was your first tenet?
My first tenet, in short, was basically that there are other civilizations that live on other former giants that have their eyes set on this. And one in particular that is not our heroes is going for the crotch.
Yes.
Because there's you got all the hair down there. You got good defensible openings into the body cavity.
You've got the high ground. Yeah, no, I'm with you. Yep, I hear you.
Still kind of maintain though it is a flaccid cock. I just don't see. He wasn't hung. I mean, he was hung, but 3.61 miles. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Yep. 3 Mile Island, New York. That's what I'm talking about. Anyway, Courtney, also, he could have had a micro. You don't know. You're going by averages. You don't know what this giant was like, John. I'm just saying that every person is unique and beautiful and different in their own interesting ways. Courtney, what was your first tenet? What did we talk about with you? I genuinely don't remember.
That was like similar to how humans have microbes and mites on our body. The sky giant has an ecosystem of similar creatures, and given the difference in scale, those small quote unquote mites on its body are a lot bigger. And as John broke down the math, they're about like 55 feet long, you said?
Yeah, around there.
Yeah. So that's horrifying.
Right. Yeah, that's horrifying. I think that that's an interesting like kind of background flavor as well. Plus, we get to intermingle, and this is a segue with my first tenet as well. My first tenet being that the sky giant died in a cataclysmic battle with a kaiju, and the kaiju is still alive and rotting. And when you mix in the microbes of Courtney's tenet along with the microbes of the giant kaiju crab that we're talking about, oh, I'm just imagining that you're getting all sorts of gross intermingling of all sorts of. It's gross, and I'm here for it.
That's the man versus nature aspect of the story, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, like all the little microbes and stuff. Yeah, I gotcha.
You just said that the kaiju was alive but rotting. Do you mean it's been killed but is rotting?
Yes. Sorry,
Okay.
I did not mean alive and rotting,
Yeah.
because that's what we're doing currently. Yeah. Anyway, so John, hit us with your second tenet. What was your second tenet? Remind us.
The second was the remaining blood in the giant's body is caustic.
And Courtney followed up because I think you had something very similar for your second tenet as well.
Yeah, mine was that its blood, unlike the hair, doesn't regenerate, but it's a very valuable resource, and it's basically radioactive.
Yeah, and I think how do you guys feel about how your tenets kind of develop? Do you think that that's well developed? Do you think that that's good? What are we thinking about?
I think we can figure it out more next time too as we flesh out the world more. But yeah, I like that it's how we delved into the whole like breath as magic and the lungs, and the blood is maybe more of like an oil or uranium type of resource, not magic.
Yeah, I think mine was just that it was also a hazard to the exploring and mining of the body.
Yeah.
Yes. So you could like when you hit an artery, it's like, oh, that's a bad thing. It's not like you
wipes out the whole troop.
Yeah.
Yes.
And can be used as a military tactic too. Like you have a bunch of guys hold up in the nasal cavity, and all of a sudden you set one incendiary out there, and it opens up blood vessels and stuff.
I suppose. Yeah, I mean, like this actually raises an interesting point. Is the blood coagulating? Like mind you, because of how it's magic, we can have it so the timeline, is longer. But is the blood coagulating? Will it eventually harden, or is this something that is like it's perma liquid?
I think because the body doesn't rot, it also keeps its liquid form.
Okay, yeah.
Interesting.
That works for me.
Sure, we can do that. My second tenet was the fact that once this giant died, magic will start to slowly fade from the world, and people don't know that yet. And I feel like, again, that's going to be something that is going to come up later. Although, we often try and think like how, in terms of timeline, where do we want this to take place? Is it very shortly after the giant's fall? Is it like long enough into the timeline where colonies or like early colonies have been established and there's still time for more exploration? Or is it like, are people already starting to recognize that magic is dying? Like, where do we want to be on the timeline?
I think it'd be interesting if this was a book or a series of books, that it'd be like a trilogy with time skips, where you have the intro with a little bit of a first chapter or a prologue about like when the giant was alive and things were okay, and then from there you kind of go through the battle to the what happens to the world and how they react, and is the journey to get to this and the race to get to the fallen body to start claiming land. And then from there you have the whole like survival and battle aspect of it with the different factions or different countries setting up their camps and staking the lands. And then from there, I think the third one would be the transition from magic to this new resource power. And it kind of becomes more like a steampunky style world than instead of a fantasy world.
Interesting.
Right. So we're looking at like a Foundation series type of timeline here.
Well, so I wasn't going to go directly there. I was going to make it more linear, but I would also be fine if it wasn't linear and it was kind of like, well, I don't want to deal with time travel or anything like that, of course. Sorry, too much going on. I was just thinking more of like a progressive like concept, like how it starts, like how the world used to be, the new world, and then the the future like on the horizon.
Okay, so let's loop back to my question. Where do we want to start focusing on the timeline then? Is this like months after? Is this like in the early stages where like we've just gotten our landing parties onto the giant? Or is it like a year after the giant fell? What are we thinking?
I'm thinking earlier on, like when people are starting to get there and stake claims and so on. John, what do you think?
I agree. I think even like I said, like I definitely would like a prologue when the giant is still alive to establish what the world used to be like, and then like start basically at the death part where the other problems with the ocean levels rising and whatever. Because I think a really cool like way to end the first book or whatever would be the arrival at the body and like the you know the majesty of all that, you know, and the journey that led up to it, and then you know, from there you go into the exploration of the wilds and setting up of camps and, you know, mining operations and all that. And then the military aspect of it too. Because why wouldn't they be fighting on the way over too? Like if they're like converging on, you know, most places are converging on the head, would there be sea battles and whatnot?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Especially Age of Sail.
Are there alliances made?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I'm definitely thinking that we're looking at armadas here. You know, where we're looking at, there's definitely pirates, there's definitely sea battles that happen, but realistically, it is about the land grab. And unless countries are actively at war, I don't see them like traveling parallel, looking across the starboard and being like, I'm going to bomb the fuck out of them or cannon the fuck out of them. Think about it like, okay, it's been too long since I've mentioned the 1999 Brendan Fraser classic, The Mummy. But imagine like, okay, you've got Rick's group and you've got Benny's group where they're both trying to get to Hamunaptra, but they're not actively trying to shoot each other, right? They might want to sabotage a little bit, but they're not actively trying to murder one another. I'm getting that kind of vibe from this particular thing where it's like, we don't want to kill you in the crib. We're civilized people for the most part, with big air quotes, obviously, around civilized. But you know, but like that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting, where there's no utter hatred going on at the moment. But if you guys want to take that in a different direction, I'm cool with that as well.
No, I don't think all the different countries or civilizations or whatever would be at war, but I definitely think I mean, I would like the ones, you know, situated around the Wang to actually be kind of like the bad guys. Yeah, because they're like crafty and they're you know, they're coming in a different direction.
Dicks. Because they're dicks.
Exactly.
Yeah,
because they're dicks. One-eyed children are snakes in the grass, right?
Oh god. Could also see piracy being a thing as all these armadas are heading towards the body, and could be a good opportunity for pirates to pop up and try to get stuff from them before they actually reach the giant.
Or even after they reach the giant or trying to get back to the mainlands.
Yeah.
Hey, do you need safe passage to the giant? Don't worry, I've got you. Oh wait, just kidding. I've press ganged you into a pirate ship. Or JK, you're actually getting sold into chattel slavery. You know, like there's all sorts of fucked up things that people can do, you know, with the false promise of, you know, the new world, so to speak.
Yeah.
I dig it.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Yeah, I'm happy. I'm excited to see where this goes.
Yeah.
All right. We've recapped our tenets, right? We're good to go. We're excited to see where everything happens. So I think now is a good place to roll for our twist and figure out what we're going to have to deal with next time. And our twist this time is very appropriate considering who submitted the twist. Everyone has an animal companion. So,
the golden compass. All right.
Honestly, that's where my brain initially goes to.
Yeah.
All right. So I think exciting to see where this goes next time. That's going to do it for this episode of World Build with Us. Remember that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, where you can click the link, follow some instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, we're over on YouTube and on Twitter at Let's World Build. where you can go hang out, and maybe you're listening to us on YouTube right now. Who knows? If you want to come talk to us more directly, you're more than welcome to do so on our Discord, where you can chat with us about, I don't know, giant wangs, I guess. There's a lot in this episode if you want to have discussions. All right, that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
So you can come talk to us more directly on our Discord, or if you're feeling particularly generous or just want to say thank you for all the years of podcasting, you can go to our Patreon and just give us a little bit of money, donate a little bit of money. And in return, you get all sorts of sweet, sweet patron only goodies, like a patron only Discord and 2 episodes instead of 1 for your prompts. So with all of that out the way, John, what you got some time to shill? What are we shilling for this week? Where can people find you on the internet?
So I've abandoned my own YouTube channel because I've been spending time learning editing and doing the shorts for OSR Plus on YouTube. So that's at OSRPLUS. Please go look at my shorts. I'm getting better by the day.
They are
very good.
No, they're great shorts. Yeah, you've got a real talent for it, John. Yeah, 100%.
We gotta get you back on there for a new recording.
Oh, trust me. Now that I'm out of grad school, I'm definitely dying to get back into it. But I'm also moving
in New York. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm also moving, which is going to be a pain in the ass. So we'll figure it out. We'll get there.
We'll drink Manhattans.
I really don't want to. I did that on the way to Manhattan, so I don't want to do one to Manhattan as well. I know that sounds confusing. Don't worry about it. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of World Build with us. Remember that we love you very much, and we're going to get through this together. Until next week.